Everybody to please take a seat. We will go ahead and get started.
Got a special VIP guest.
I know there's a special VIP guest that he doesn't want me to announce him.
Oh, Miss Lucy. Oh, darn.
All right, let's go ahead and get back to the meeting. Everybody enjoy lunch. Oh, it looks like we have somebody here on the front row I just want to take a minute to introduce. He's probably going to kick me later, but another commissioner on the California Transportation Commission, Mr. Joe Tavallone. Joe, thank you very much for being here.
Uncle Joe.
Lisa, did Lucy catch up with you?
No, but she left me a card.
Yeah, she
Okay.
was here.
She stuck her head in. She was looking for you. Thank you, Joe, for stopping by.
And I got to the part where I had to enter my VIN on the enrollment, so I couldn't do that.
Well, you know what? You just said something, Pam, that Lucy just talked about upstairs when I got a chance to grab a bite to eat with her. So, Matthew, you guys, here's something to keep in mind. Commissioner Dunn was just telling me, and now we just heard it from Councilmember O'Connor, that she's filling out the form on the website
Lunchtime,
in her office. Well, this is Lucy was telling me this. She was filling it out in her office,
I did it right.
and it asked for her VIN number.
I go, yeah.
And she says, well, heck, I don't have that with me. That's down in the car. So perhaps a suggestion is to have a checklist of things that you're going to need to start this process, you know, as the first screen or something or other, if it's possible, in the sign-up process. So that way, people will know the material they need to gather together before she went. She was saying how she went through all the process, everything down, she got down to needing the VIN. And she's, heck,
Couldn't complete it.
It's awaiting me when I get home, I'll fill it
it
in.
killed the process, and it could kill sign-ups.
So you guys don't memorize your VIN?
Yeah, not this week. Professor?
A similar question. Earlier, we discussed whether we could use real money or not, and whether we could pay people rewards or not. And in general, the decision was made that we can't transact money. But I've been offered a $50 reward if I finish the program. Can you explain? I think it's great. I think incentives are important, but I don't understand the inconsistency between being told earlier that we can't do it and now that it seems to be done.
Carrie, do you want to comment on that?
So it's more, as far as what we can't do is the collection of revenue. It's the collection of revenue. What we're doing in essence is incentivizing the participants to remain in the pilot throughout the entire pilot, complete a closeout process and return the device, and then you'll be awarded $50 for your participation in the pilot. It's not, we're not collecting money based on how many miles you're driving and collecting revenue in that manner, and that's where the differentiation is. To get back to the question about, the VIN and all the things, with our very short attention span, some of us don't maybe read all of our email or look at the website page, but it does state in there the items that are needed in order, when you go on to enroll, make sure you have your VIN number, your driver's license, your mileage. I mean, there are it's in there in multiple
Are
locations.
you suggesting that I have a short attention
No,
span?
no,
I sign up for you.
no, I'm the
Are
same
you
way.
suggesting Commissioner Dunn has a short attention span?
No, I did the same thing. I did the
Councilmember
same
O'Connor,
thing.
Well, I just said, I'll do it when I get home. I'll finish it there.
I just got my butt kicked from Commissioner Dunn about it, so, anyway, it's all good. All right, well, this is all good discussion. Let's, we're actually behind for one, so let's kind of pick up the pace, people. Item 8 on the agenda is next. It's the pilot project evaluation plan, and Brady and Mike Warren are going to give us the status report on where we are with CHM2 Hill.
My part of this is going to be pretty brief. Caltrans and CH2M Hill have been
That's right,
working
Hill.
on the draft evaluation plan on all the different elements that will be evaluated as part of the pilot program. Again, it's evaluated against the recommendations in terms of evaluation criteria that you have provided us. And with no further ado, I'd like to introduce Mike Warren, Project Manager, CH2M Hill, to give the TAC a brief update on what's happened.
Thanks, Brady. Thank you, TAC. I promise I will be brief, and I will definitely be fighting through the carb coma from lunch. So real quick, we're just going to talk about what we have done to date. Oh, hold on. Here we go. So since the project kicked off in February, I got it. Yeah. We have been focusing primarily on the planning, getting things ready for conducting the data gathering as well as the analysis and ultimately the evaluation and reporting. So the big drivers, we completed a data gathering planning workshop with Caltrans on April 21st. That led to the completion of our objectives traceability matrix and interview questions. We supported the end-to-end testing by providing a sample survey for all the end-to-end testers where for those that did the end-to-end testing, you should have gotten a link for a survey. If you didn't complete it as soon as you got it, you got a follow-up email the next day reminding you to take the survey, and then we were able to just test the mechanics of our survey coming from the participants all the way through to our survey taker system, collecting the information. We have started the survey process. Actually, the first round of pre-pilot surveys went out to participants yesterday. As of yesterday, 605 surveys had been sent out to participants. As of this morning, 224 surveys had been completed. So about 37%, which for first day is pretty good. We'll be doing reminder emails on those that have not completed surveys for this first batch. We'll start those next Monday. I'm sorry, next Thursday. And then a new batch of surveys will be going out, another 600 plus, based on those that have enrolled in, or that have signed up for the project, for the pilot, will be going out on Monday. So we're doing these in about 600-ish waves right now. Unique logins, unique identifiers for the participants, so we don't know who's completed their survey or not. We just know that, participant ID XXY1234 has completed it. There will be some demographic information tied to each of those unique IDs, but again, we won't be able to tie that back to any one particular participant. We also, over the past 2 weeks, have completed all of our pre-pilot interviews. Last week, we were able to successfully interview the members of the interagency working group. And then actually yesterday, we were able to interview the project delivery team, both Caltrans and D'Artagnan, to capture some of that baseline information as to what's led up to the pilot, what's led up to the planning and the pilot deployment, and really what the expectations are for the pilot moving forward. Over the past 3 days, we have also interviewed 3 of the 4 account managers, with that final interview scheduled for late next week. So, moving forward, we will be issuing a follow-up survey for those that have signed up for mileage reporting options that require some type of receipt or installation. So if you ordered a OBD2 based solution, for example, that device is being mailed to you, you'll install it in your vehicle. We'll be conducting a follow-up survey to those participants or those that had to download and install an app. And those are going to be more of the experiential based. How did your installation process go? Were there any issues with the app, any issues tethering to your Bluetooth, or were the instructions adequately provided? All of these questions we have developed, sent them to Caltrans for review, and then those were sent up to agency for review and approval. So first round of surveys, we are ready to go with those. Starting our evaluation on some of the project documents that we've received. This includes the project schedule, obviously the legislation, a lot of the organizational components, the technical requirements and interface standards, which Matthew alluded to earlier. And then we'll be so we're starting that analysis. We're also going to be conducting a data analysis workshop with Caltrans late July. And that's where we're actually going to go through each of the TAC criteria and define what types of analysis, whether qualitative, quantitative, and what types of analyses under those categories we'll be doing to meet each of those criteria. Preparing for mid-pilot interviews and surveys, we will start those surveys in the September-October timeframe. So August, September, we'll be prepping for those. And then we want to, because of the schedule, we want to start providing interim drafts of the reports. So we're expecting our first wave of interim drafts to the 4 evaluation reports to be coming out sometime in September. That's all I've got. Any questions? Yes.
A quick clarification point. Are the pre-surveys going to everyone who enrolls or to a sample?
So the pre-surveys are going out to everyone that has enrolled as a participant. And then for those that select certain mileage reporting options, there'll be a follow-up survey sent out to get more of the experiential information. We wanted to account for any lag. You know, obviously, we want to get the attitudinal information as early as possible before any experiences come in that bias an opinion. So we decided to split up the surveys. We did, everybody got what we call the attitudinal survey. Then for those that are having to wait for a device to be shipped or having to download an app or do some additional steps to truly participate in the program, we're sending out a sub-survey to them to get some of their experiential measures.
I have a
Yes.
question. I'm sorry, when you said everyone, what do you mean by everyone?
Everyone that has enrolled in the
So
pilot.
every enrollee, as they enroll, will
Yes.
get a rolling survey?
Yes, sir.
I have a question, and so, clarification, won't know if an individual has not completed the survey?
We will know by unique ID who has not completed the survey, and we'll be sending reminder emails to them. We won't know who that person is.
And are surveys only completable by being online, or can?
Surveys, so we have the capability to provide mailed surveys. I think right now the survey engine has been developed in English. The printed surveys are also available in English. We have just completed a Spanish translation. So if Spanish is their primary language, signs up for the program, they can access via the web, or we can also send them a printed survey.
Any other questions?
Yeah, Mike,
Yes.
would it be possible to share with the committee all the surveys that you've been using? And then second part is, will we have an opportunity to give any feedback on the draft of the survey that's coming up later in the summer or fall?
The answer is I think it's up to Caltrans. All of our survey questions have been developed. We've vetted them with Caltrans. Then Caltrans has also worked with CalSTA to get approval on them. I'm going to defer to Caltrans if that needs to be expanded to a larger group.
As far as the questions that have been developed, they're all based on the criteria, the evaluation criteria that the TAC has recommended. So we made sure that we stayed within those parameters and weren't asking for opinion at this point. It's really very based on what the criteria was set by the TAC. Certainly, we can share drafts of what we're putting together, but we want to try to reduce the amount of exposure so when they do go out to the participants, it's very fresh and they can answer accurately.
Can you share the ones that are being used at this point?
Certainly, I don't think there's an issue with sharing them with the TAC.
And
Stephen?
I had just sort of an overall question, and tell me if you've touched on this at a prior meeting
Sure.
or even now. I assume that one of your key starting points for your overall evaluation report that you'll be delivering later are the items that we approved as items that need to be part of the evaluation. I also assume that CalSTA, or maybe Caltrans or others, may be giving you some input, direction, or ideas for things maybe beyond that or fine-tuning that. Can you map, or have you, or will you be mapping all of the input this committee gave you and input others are giving you into what you will be doing so that we won't be surprised later on
Yes,
with
absolutely.
what you deliver, and we'll be able to see how all those elements fit?
Yes, sir. So what we're using is kind of the foundational component for this entire evaluation is what we call the objectives traceability matrix. And that takes the TAC-approved criterion, and then we are actually putting in steps as to the types of data we're going to collect, the types of analysis we're going to collect. Now, when we do the reports, we're going to build on this objective traceability matrix with our data analysis workshop next month, where we will say, okay, in addition to, I'll use driver behaviors. You know, if road charging has a positive, negative, or neutral impact on driver behaviors, you know, we will then be working with Caltrans to define, okay, do we want to also subdivide this by certain demographics based on the demographic information for those participants that have signed up. So if we want to look at a particular region, if we want to look at a particular income level based on county, things like that, those things are what we're going to define, what we're going to refine in this workshop. But the traceability matrix is really what we're using as the foundational component, which is the TAC approved criteria.
That'd be great. And also, just as you're getting direction going forward, it'd be nice to know, you know, if other items are going to be included or,
Sure.
or how that might be evolving.
Absolutely. So part of this workshop next month, we'll also be going through the, what I call the storyboard of the reports. It's kind of a fleshed out outline. And we'll be presenting all of the pieces and then working with Caltrans to kind of fill in the extras.
Okay.
Any other questions? All right. Thank you for your time.
All right, thank you very much. So we've heard that from Michael. Let's now go to item 9 on the agenda, and Mitch and Carrie are going to kick us off on just a little update on what's happening in the world of federal funding to keep this thing going and get it even better.
Okay, and I'll provide a brief overview, and if there are any hard questions, I'll turn it over to Carrie to answer. Just as a reminder, the FAST Act made $95 million available for funding for these funding alternatives grants. The applications for the first round of $15 million were due on May 20th. From what I hear, 8 applications were submitted in grants requests totaling more than $20 million. All the fund requests appear to be for pre-development activities and not a full-on pilot. Caltrans submitted an application requesting $750,000 to expand the road charge pilot program in 3 areas: education and outreach, organizational structure and compliance program development, and then the investigation of pay at the pump or charging station alternatives. Caltrans is also part of an application submitted by Western Rock, as Norma mentioned earlier. This application requests $1.5 million to define a regional system and to promote road charge consistency, interoperability, and compatibility. There are a couple of broad categories. There's system definition and project planning, and it'll include activities such as a regional pilot communications and outreach plan, a regional pilot evaluation plan, a regional pilot oversight and management plan, and a regional pilot implementation scope, schedule, and budget. And hopefully the work done here will lead the way for next year a actual application to implement a multi-state pilot. With that, we'd be happy to answer any questions.
Carrie, do you want to add anything? No, okay. Any other questions? So really the idea is to see if we can't, the multi-state one, there's stuff going on within California to see if we can expand the program even a little bit more. I'd personally like to test out this technology pay at the pump thing. So if we get some money that comes back as a result of getting an award from the federal government, the discussion that I've had with folks that would support us in this effort within the administration is to take some of that saved money that was already budgeted for this program and simply move it to another pilot that would encompass technology. So we'll see how that works out for us as we move forward. And certainly keep you all informed as to what's going on. All right, well, moving right along, let's go on to the next item on the agenda, and that's to talk about some of the policy issues, predominantly on the income equity and jurisdictional out-of-state matters, and that's item 10 on the agenda. Mitch, you're going to kick that off?
Yeah, yes, I just wanted to remind the committee members, these are informational items, they're not action items. We're trying to ensure that we accurately frame some of the policy issues that are going to have to be addressed in both the Transportation Agency's report and the Transportation Commission's report, and that we want all of your opinion on whether we've got these covered, whether we got these covered correctly, whether we address all the issues that we need to address. And with that, I'll turn it over to Jeff.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. As Mitch said, there are two issues listed on your agenda. I think they're called policy issues, and I think maybe the better or more accurate characterization is that these are updates or progress reports on topics that we are researching, both at your direction as part of the pilot, and then also at the direction of Caltrans as they start to think through what it would be like for them or another state agency to have to deal with some of the implementation issues. And that topic is the second topic. It's the one on jurisdictional issues. We'll start first, though, with the income equity considerations. And again, this is you may remember that last year, in fact, exactly a year ago, I was in front of the committee and we had our briefing book material on the broad topic of income equity and particularly how a RUC or a road charge might compare to the gas tax. And there was a lot of background information, and the committee made actually some suppositions and asked for this topic to continue to be researched, and that's what we're doing. If you wanted to tie it back to your report, you would find that specifically the TAC recommended that we gather data on the vehicle ownership and the type of vehicle, meaning MPG and model and year, the number of miles driven by participants, cross-tabulated in this case with income groups, and at some point through the survey process that Mike described, we would like to measure the perceived affordability of a road charge versus the existing gas tax. So those were your recommendations, and what this next few minutes is intended to do is bring you up to date on some preliminary research. I guess it's not preliminary, it's research that we've been able to conduct, or at least the D'Artagnan team has. I didn't participate in it. Based on existing data and statistics, as well as some new data that our team was able to pull from the state DMV. So the key questions, there are 4 of them, they're listed as sub-bullets up there, or areas that we're interested in, are understanding whether a flat rate road charge is more or less regressive than the current gas tax. And let me stop right there. What you'll see on your slides is the term flat rate road charge. And what we're really referring to is a per mile fee of a single rate. We're not talking about a per mile fee based on location or jurisdiction or time of day or congestion level. It's only what we've been talking about here at the TAC committee. So that's one of the limitations. Also, what rate factors, if any, should be considered and applied, and if so, by what method? If you recall back last year, this was described as accommodations. They can either be in the rates themselves or ex post after people have incurred a road charge. Is there something that government can or should be doing to try to account for people of lower income that may have difficulty paying? The third question has to do with, well, it's really an assumption whether or not it's true that low-income drivers tend to have older, less fuel-efficient vehicles. And if that assumption is correct, what's the implication of that? And then finally, whether or not a payment mechanism that is an alternative, really, to a flat fee that has to be paid, or if not a flat fee, at least a road charge bill every month. In other words, something similar that the chair has mentioned, pay-as-you-go system, similar to the gas tax, whether or not that would make a difference to the users of the system in terms of affordability.
Before we move the slide, on the second bullet, when you say what, if any, rate factors should be considered, what do you mean by should, I guess? And I mean, what's the, I mean, that sounds like it could be a very subjective kind of thing. I'm just wondering to know where that goes.
Well, that's a good observation. In fact, if I could rewrite that, or if we could rewrite that, we probably wouldn't even have that up there. It would be, probably the better way to describe it is whether or not there are financial accommodations that could be made rather than should be made, because really should is a determination for other policy bodies besides, certainly besides your consultants, but probably even outside the scope of the TAC.
Can I ask one question? One issue related to income equity is this: if someone can't afford to put gas in their car, they can't drive. Whereas if someone doesn't pay their bill, presumably their car will still start and they can still go places. Is that a consideration in terms of equity, that basically how does the inability to pay for this affect your immediate mobility?
There's even something greater to consider is that places of high poverty and perhaps in a rural area where you have to drive, then you don't eat, or you don't buy that new pair of pants.
Yeah, I guess
It's not a matter of not driving.
I think what we're going to do is just record the questions that we have so that we can take them back as we go through the next 9 months and make sure that we're addressing the questions that the TAC has. Mitch, did you have something?
Yeah,
you
no,
wanted to add?
I just want to clarify, I think you had it on one of your early slides, and we just went over it real quick. This is an initial presentation based on the research that they've done. This and a number of the topics that we'll be discussing over the coming meetings are going to be discussed multiple times. So we will be discussing the issue of income equity once we have some actual data. So this isn't our only time to comment on, so I wanted to make sure that was noted.
Yeah, thank you
Lisa.
for that.
Yeah, with regard to the rate factors, so to kind of tack on to what Stephen was saying about rate factors, what types of things were you even considering, or did you conceivably come up with things that would fall into that category as far as discounts, or instead of 1.5 cents a mile, it might be 1 cent a mile, and who might fall into a category, or, because when you pay at the gas pump, everybody pays the same rate, so what were your thoughts on that?
What we presented last summer was a little bit more comprehensive, and just in summary, what it was is, yes, in order to apply a different rate for that vehicle, based on income, because that's what we're talking about here, you would have to know the income level of the participant, or sorry, not the participant, but the driver. And that presents a challenge in and of itself, so that you could apply a differential rate to whoever happened to be driving that car. So what the material from last summer tried to lay out is that if policymakers at some point wanted to make some sort of accommodations for lower income drivers, mechanically, if not at least, if not policy-wise, it perhaps would be easier to do that not with differential rates, but things that you could, I'll call them vouchers, or something that, anything really, any
Tax
levers,
credit, yeah.
policy levers that government might have to make it more affordable for drivers, rather than trying to have differential rates. So now I'm very much regretting the fact that we made mention of rates. It should have been much more comprehensive than that.
Yeah, I would just add, I think the legislature right now has the power of saying, for those of you that drive so much and you don't have a certain income, we'll give you a tax credit or whatever it is. And they haven't touched it. And I've cautioned more times than not, what the language in SB 1077 talks about making sure that we follow social justice issues, but it never gets into the rate, and it talks about it being rate neutral. And I still think we just keep opening Pandora's box, at least at this level, getting into this thing, and this is a discussion I believe is much better left for the legislature. And I will continue to say that to anybody that brings it up.
Yeah, I think we have to continue with revenue neutrality, because as soon as you start having out groups that get credits and you start carving out, that affects the revenue model. I mean, we've had a couple of things that have been proposed legislatively. One of them was Sharon Runner's bill, SB 1259. And so it was to give the veterans that fall into certain categories the ability to ride toll roads, toll lanes, toll bridges free. And, we greatly appreciate everything the veterans have done for the country, but as soon as you start to carve out, and we don't force anybody to ride on toll roads. We've got the freeways and arterials and so on, but as soon as you start to have these carve-out groups, the next thing you know, well, it's low income, that's a carve-out. Senior citizens on a fixed income, that could be a carve-out. So then you don't have enough of an ability to generate enough revenue, for instance, on toll roads to pay the bonds, and you're in compliant with the bond covenant. So it's just something we have to keep in mind as far as, social justice is certainly, part of the equation, but there has to be that balancing act. And I think that's something we really need to keep in mind here. So because legislatively, if something does come up from a legislative perspective regarding VMT, we have to keep on top of that as well, because the legislators invariably will come up with different mechanisms to pander to their constituents, and they will start having carve-out groups. They will, trust me, this will be coming down the road as soon as this program becomes a reality. So we just have to keep on top of it.
And if I could just add in, not to beat this poor dead horse too much more, but, I would like to echo what Chairman Daffer said and Supervisor Bartlett said to a degree, and I think we've had this discussion before. These are legitimate issues that need to be thought about and talked about, and as a result of the criteria and the other discussions we've had, that's why you're bringing this back to us. But I'm convinced that any effort through our process, and even beyond our process, to try to differentiate rate based on almost anything, income, vehicle type, will doom this thing, and it will never, ever happen. And so if we're interested in moving this forward, moving it forward in the most straightforward way, the gas tax now has strengths and weaknesses, and arguably inherent fairnesses or unfairnesses. A replacement system, although it may be better or different, and the evaluation will tell us some of that, it cannot solve all problems or address all desires. And so I just want to reiterate that, we'll all have spent a lot of time for nothing if we go down any of those paths, so.
Concur. Any other questions, comments? You good?
Yes, we can segue onto this, which is, we've been talking about concepts of equity, in this case, income equity. If you, again, imagine what we were and still are calling horizontal equity, it's the notion that people in a similar situation should pay similar amounts for the benefits that they derive. And in income equity, of course, the similar situation is framed in the context of how, what's your relative income level, or what is your income level. In user fees, similar situation, and I think this is what Commissioner Bartlett was talking about, is that, for instance, in toll roads, when you have a direct user fee, the similar situation is you have access to that particular lane at that particular time, and everyone crossing at that time is quote-unquote similarly situated. So for this purpose, though, what we would like to do is compare the gas tax with the road charge in terms of its horizontal equity as well as vertical equity. And just briefly, vertical equity is the notion that people that have a greater ability to pay should pay more, even if the good is the same, the public good's the same. During, I think, some early soundings of this material, a couple of the members pointed out, or one of the members pointed out, that another dimension of tax equity is also can be measured in the distribution of benefits. So even though you may be paying the same amount as someone next to you, if you're not deriving the benefits from those payments, or there may be some way to redistribute the benefits of those revenues collected, that can be another avenue for measuring tax equity. Historically, now we're turning to the gas tax, when vehicles had roughly the same MPG, this has been really until the early to mid-70s, most vehicles had about the same fuel efficiency. So the gas tax was, at the time anyway, more arguably horizontally equitable. In other words, people were paying about the same amount per mile driven. Now, it wasn't vertically equitable because low-income drivers were paying a higher percentage of their income to travel for a mile than, of course, high-income drivers or higher-income drivers were. But what's happened over the time, and particularly, as you know, lately, is that as vehicle MPG has increased with the new model of cars, the gas tax is believed to be, at least comparatively, less horizontally equitable, because those who are able to afford or invest in more fuel-efficient vehicles, which are the newer or high-technology vehicles, they are actually paying less per mile, not only than they were before, but then people who have older vehicles, which tend to be lower income. And so that is where we basically left off last summer, is we need to understand whether that is factual, and if so, what are the dimensions of it, and potentially what are the impacts. Now that's on the gas tax side of things. With the road charge, obviously, that wouldn't be the case. Everybody would be paying the same per mile. Sorry, let me catch up here. Again, the four questions are, we want to know the regressivity of the gas tax, rate factors, which is not highlighted, that's going to be changed as accommodations if the committee is going to weigh in on that. The distribution of the vehicle age and efficiency, I'm going to highlight those for you. And then the perceived affordability of lump sum payments is also not covered today in the material. What has happened is our team has developed models to estimate the distributional impact of the per mile road charges, or at least we're working on that now. We can only work with the material that we have in stock, which, there it is working from the 2009 National Household Travel Survey. So that's data that's collected roughly every 8 years or so. It's self-reported. I think Shannon and/or Travis presented this last year. This is the data set that's out there right now that we have to work with. It has some limitations. It's self-reported, as is not only the mileage, but vehicle ownership and the characteristics. It's also dated now, and the last survey that was taken was in the midst of the Great Recession, which, may or may not have, probably did change people's driving behaviors as there were more layoffs, and VMT actually went down during that period. So what our team has done is that they have also incorporated some other data sources to supplement the NHTS data. Principally, California had the add-on to the NHTS survey. Although it was published a year later, the California supplemental questions were done at the same time. So that's been incorporated. And then again in 2014, as part of the census process, the American Community Survey gathered information from drivers, from drivers. And that was also used to supplement the analysis in the model that we're creating. The final two sources are new information that we were able to pull from the state DMV, and that is for the entire state, all vehicle registrations and the data at the zip code level, including the vehicle model and type and year, which allows us to extract through a decoding process of the VINs, the EPA estimated fuel economy. So those last two data sources are new, and we're trying to incorporate them now into the models. This slide you have in front of you is a snapshot of the median household income. This is by census tract. This is, again, sort of the base starting point. It did come from the NHTS survey. And on top of that, or in addition to that, was layered in information from the American Community Survey, ACS survey, which is the one that asks more specific questions, including this one, which what you see now is a snapshot of the number of drivers 16 years or older than 16, that are at the federal poverty level or below, who drive a car to work. And that's what the distribution looks like. So our team was able to pull this data in as well. And then moving on, what you see now is this is the new data that has been pulled, and this is from the
Excuse me, I just want to make, I'm sorry to interrupt. No, actually, I'm not sorry, but.
I was just going to say, we know.
Okay. I just want to make sure I understand this, that colorful map. The more green an area.
You go back a notch on the slides.
Yep, sorry.
Thank you.
The more green, the greener an area, the fewer workers drive a car?
Fewer
poverty.
low-income workers.
Say,
Fewer low-income.
fewer low-income workers. Is it because, and it's a, could it be because there are fewer, well, what are the variables there? I mean, could it be fewer, that there are fewer low-income workers there, or there are fewer of them who drive a car?
I don't know the answer to that. I'll have to get with our team that pulled the data to find out.
But these are percentages.
I know, but I'm not sure what it's a percentage of.
Percentage of the population in that.
Yeah.
Okay, it's a percentage of the overall population
Probably over 16 years.
with income less than, okay, so the base is poor adults, or sort of.
Well, no, the base is poor adults who work.
Well, where does it say that?
If you're in poverty
Where does it say?
if you're in poverty but not employed,
Okay, so it is poor, okay, so it's poor adults who work, and it's the percentage who drive a car, so they do, so it's so it does include, so it's, it corrects for whether there's a lot of employment or not a lot of employment. Am I reading, is that right?
We'll verify
I don't
with the
think
data.
that's clear.
Okay,
It's
thank
not-
you.
it's not
Thank
clear
you.
from this.
Okay, thank you. I do apologize now for
This
interrupting.
now goes into the parking lot, and we'll come back to you at the next meeting, if not before, and
Yeah, this is,
clarify that.
I'm glad you raised this, Lauren, because actually this is, first of all, it's clear now to me that this map is different from a map of percentage living in poverty,
Right.
because that universe includes people who are not working, and just logically, the more people in poverty aren't working, I'm guessing, than are. So, yeah, it's sort of questionable now what the value
Yeah,
is.
I'm not sure what this means. I'm not actually sure what this is telling me, but maybe you could get back to me on that as
I
well.
will get back to you
Okay.
on that with the answer. I know that the purpose was as a cross-check to make sure that the research team is not overlooking areas where there's obvious lower-income people who are car-reliant to work.
Yeah,
That
I
was
think
the
the
intention.
problem with the census data is it only tells you about commute trips, and so people who drive but are unemployed are not captured in this.
Got it. Okay. Please let us get back to you on that. We want to get it right. Okay, with the new vehicle data that was pulled from the Department of Motor Vehicles, just to summarize, because we are running out of time a little bit, what you see here is, if you think of those three regional buckets, I guess is what we were calling the recruiting demographics. We have Central California. This is an extract of Central California. And what it shows are the vehicle model year that low-income and high-income drivers, not middle-income. They've been removed from this graph so that you can see the contrast as well as an inversion point in roughly 2007. And what it is basically showing is that low-income drivers, as we had originally hypothesized, do in fact own the older cars, less fuel-efficient vehicles, and that line in terms of vehicle ownership is, I cannot see it myself from this distance, I think it's 2007. 2006 to 2007 is really where model years that are newer than that, tend to be owned by higher income individuals. And so this is new data, this is real California registration data, so it's not a survey, it's not self-reported. And we think that this is important for validating what the initial assumption was, which is that lower income drivers tend to own lower.
Could you just
older
qualify
cars.
tell us the definition of a high-income zip and a low-income zip? Is it twice the median and half the median or something like that?
The notes I got from our research team are that, at least on this graphic, the median is the same median that we used for the buckets, and that the high income is, I think it was $90,000 and up, and this is household income. And the low income is the 25th percentiles. And if that's not clear enough, I'll get Shannon, or I'll get someone to get that data. Okay, with that in mind, then what are the implications for income equity and adopting a road charge? And it's marginally less regressive than a gas tax, as we had presumed, based at least on this data. That's our preliminary finding. That's probably no surprise. Second, we have the rate factors, which is miscast here. We will go back. Really, the slide is pointing out that there are some challenges, even if you were to pursue or to consider rate factors, including the point made by Commissioner Bartlett about potential revenue leakage. Next is whether the assumption that low-income drivers use older, less fuel-efficient vehicles is correct, and thanks to the VIN data that we have and we're able to decode it, I think that the information was that about 60% of low-income drivers would, in a transitional period, if you were to actually keep the gas tax during the transition and offer credits and rebate or credits and refunds, 60% of the lower income individuals would essentially come out ahead under a road charge system as compared to the current gas tax. Another 20%, it's basically a push of all drivers. And then finally, the issue of are periodic lump sum payments versus, many frequent gas tax payments perceived as less affordable by users. This is something that we'll be testing in the pilot through the surveys, and we will look forward to getting back to you on that question later, as well as maybe some preliminary analysis of, what the implications would be if you were to pursue, or if the state were to pursue some sort of periodic payment process. Okay, so additional information.
Just a second. Supervisor Lord.
Sorry.
Question, let's see. I think slide number 11. Are you going to keep track of the administrative costs, the overhead for the different data collection and invoicing methodologies? Because they're vastly different. If you've got something that's truly technology-based, you could build your credit card, it's a lot different as far as the administrative overhead versus the time permit, mileage permit, odometer reading, where it's a heavy administrative time and effort there for expenditure. So are you going to keep track of that with the different enrollees?
Well, what we did, if you recall, is we did have a business case analysis which forecasted what we think some of those costs would be in a fully deployed system. But for the pilot itself, actually the independent evaluator is pursuing some of those questions
Good.
separate and apart from the delivery team.
Perfect.
So they'll be asking, actually, they won't be, they will ask the consultants, but they'll be asking the vendors who are providing those services as well.
Okay, because I think it's important to really have that information. Right now, when you pay at the pump, there's, I think, a 1% overhead, and it's very simple. But with these different options, it really varies. And then do we just average out the costs and build that into the vehicle miles traveled, and everybody pays that average cost? Or do you charge more than to users that want one methodology for data collection versus another? So it'll be good to have that information for the future.
Yeah, we hope we have that at the end of the pilot.
While you have that slide up, the last point, it says additional driver feedback during the pilot is necessary. I don't think that driver feedback addresses most of the issues that are listed above it, such as administrative cost or lost revenue. I don't see why. Sunlight is always good, feedback is always good, but I don't think it addresses the concerns.
Yeah, I understand. The additional driver feedback is always valuable during the pilot. It doesn't relate to the 3 bullets that preceded. I see the point, yes.
Jim, can I ask, are
Please,
we
go right ahead, Eddie.
jumping past slide 13, or would you prefer that
It's up to you guys. I mean, it's,
in the interest of time? I don't mind, but.
no, it's fine.
Well, I have a question. Your bullet shows initial data analysis, where road charges are offset, yada, yada. In order to do that analysis, that would seem to assume you have, that would suggest you have assumed a particular rate.
That's right.
What rate was that? And we don't have to discuss it, but I'm curious.
It's the rate that has been applied to the pilot project.
A revenue neutral rate.
Revenue neutral rate, in the aggregate, not obviously to every driver. But for the state, the collections are set at the revenue neutral rate, net revenue.
And is that 60% and 20% really just based on X miles per gallon or less, you're in the 60%, and Y miles per gallon or more?
That's my understanding, because we don't have driving data, we don't know how far people, so we don't know the numbers, but we can say the percentage-wise, yeah. Okay, anything more on 13? If not, here are the additional information that we'll be collecting during the pilot project. We will have the distances driven by participants, because we'll have the odometer data, one way or the other. Actual fuel consumption we hope to have, at least for the participants that are on an automated method. Say that again?
Some participants.
I said for the participants that are on an automated method.
The two professors are arguing. This is great.
We'll ask for the manual method, but I think in the early test period, we're uncertain how accurate that information will be. Participant attitudinal feedback on the payment frequency, the invoicing, I think is something that the TAC is interested in. And then data on the payment concepts and the preferences and what's being chosen. The next steps is really to conduct the pilot and to incorporate this information. The invoicing details, again, there's more of that information up there, the types of things that will be asked about. And then the survey data that will be primarily from the independent evaluator. Any further questions?
Just a comment. I just want to say I appreciate your continuing to bring this discussion back. I think that going back to your original question about the word should, obviously, Stephen, this is not something that's going to change how the pilot's done, right? This is now we're continuing to sort of think about what recommendations or lack of consensus we may come to as it gets closer to the time for the legislature to consider it. But I just want to say I think this is an important conversation to have. I hope we'll continue to keep our minds open because, I'm trying to do that despite my disagreement with the, what some of you said about not wanting to make accommodations. So I'm hearing that, and I'm also interested in thinking through it more with all of you. So thank you.
Okay. Thank you. That concludes the income equity information that we had today.
Sounds good. Talk to you soon. Well, with that then, let's look at what we might have sitting in the parking lot, as we like to call it. Right? Oh, here, I'm just trying to finish by 2.
I understand.
Well, we might still do it. We'll see. Yeah, we still can.
See if I can help you with that, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Go ahead, Jeff.
Okay, so what this is, again, it is more of a progress report. It's not information. I'll move ahead a little bit. Jurisdictional issues clearly were within the TAC's purview. It was the directive from 3092, the Senate bill section, that the committee consider jurisdictional issues, and you've done that. You've decided that out-of-state vehicles will be included in the pilot, simulating payment for driving on California roads. And as you'll see in a moment, that's being done, and particularly with the state of Oregon, you'll have some interoperability or jurisdictional issues that you will be able to measure somewhat during the pilot. However, as the state of California as a whole has to be thinking ahead and thinking through what would this be like if they were to implement a system in whatever time frame, 5 to 10 years, I think I heard earlier. There will be issues, legal and regulatory issues, and this is going to be dry and I'll move fast, and there's no clip art that can help me here. But there are things that the state of California is going to have to think through in order to have a functioning system that achieves the policies that you all have wanted to test and that the legislature is going to want to adopt. And right now, at least for today, the jurisdictional issues that we're going to focus on are the ones involving out-of-state drivers. So we're not going to discuss state and local or state and regional interactions or tax policies, nor are we going to look at the federal gas tax as a possible component of a road charge system or the international border travel. We're really only talking about state issues. It would be too much to try to go through them all, so there are 3 that I'm going to highlight for you very quickly, one of which is more ripe than the others. Here are the scenarios, just in a snapshot. You have a driver, well, first of all, the box showing California with the call-out box to the left at the bottom. That is your California Road Charge Pilot Project, 1.8 cents per mile, which is revenue neutral, net equivalent to the gas tax, the 5-year rolling average for the gas tax. So if you take that as the starting point, now what you have are 3 drivers coming from different states. One from Oregon, which has a road user charge system, and they are at 1.5 cents a mile. The 2 other drivers are coming from Nevada and Arizona, neither of which have a road charge system. They have their own gas tax. So in these instances, what we're talking about are drivers coming either from a RUC jurisdiction or from a non-RUC jurisdiction, moving into the California road charge jurisdiction. So the question, at least the first question is, what's the legal authority for assessing a road charge on out-of-state drivers? So again, we won't spend too much time on the legal authority, but the important takeaway is that not only how it is enacted by the legislature, recommended by you, enacted by the legislature, but how it's carried out could impact its enforceability and its legality. The second question or issue that we're going to highlight but not get into deeply today is the standards and requirements for distance measuring devices. So we're talking about odometers, we're talking about devices, mileage meters is the terminology we've adopted here. That's the plug-in port things, so that you have accurate distance measurement. And if you don't have that, what can be done either at the federal level or more immediately, perhaps even at your own state level, to try to ensure that you have accurate measurement of mileage. And then the last issue, which is really just letting you know that it's out there and that work is being done, is that you still have interjurisdictional or interstate issues related to who collects the revenue. In other words, who does the driver even pay in those scenarios? What happens to the entity that collects that revenue? What are their obligations to distribute and what timeliness and all that? And then how is the revenue distributed? Is it based on actual miles? Is it based on modeling? Those are the three principal questions or principal issues that we are exploring at the project team level, one of which we'll go into a little bit more deeply. The other two I'm going to skip over in the interest of time, or at least brush over.
Well, I think we make them up the way we want it for California. We ask everybody else to follow suit.
Sounds good to me.
I mean, the truckers have already figured this out, right?
They have. They have. Okay, so the legal authority, transportation, taxation, it's all based on taxable events that happen within the state. You would pay the gas tax within the state. You travel your roadways, it's at the situs or whether it's the lane or the bridge or the toll road. Vehicle licensing fees, it's a little bit softer around the edges. There are some issues there, but it's based primarily on your place of residence. And the road charge would be based on driving on public roadways within the state. So that's the same, you have the same premise of a taxable event. The potential issues really are, there is a constitutional right to travel, just like the privacy rights we discussed earlier. You won't find it written in the Constitution, right to travel. It is been found consistently, really, since the beginning of the Supreme Court to have pre-existed, and so it's a constitutionally protected right under the, I'm forgetting Article 4. I'm drawing a blank. Doesn't matter. The enumerated powers clauses. So what you have to consider is there anything in a road charge system that could potentially impair the public's, or I'm going to set in a separate category, the commerce, their quote-unquote right to travel. So how you set up your road charge system, for example, if you were to, charge a higher rate for out-of-state travelers and in-state travelers, that certainly would be challenged and the state would probably lose on that grounds. That's a caution in the design of your road charge system. There's something a little bit more nuanced that you want to be aware of, and this is why we're bringing it to the TAC, because even though these are probably more implementation issues, they will affect your design choices and design recommendations. And that is, when you are trying to capture revenue from out-of-state drivers, how you do it in practice matters, because even if you have the same rate, okay, we're going to charge in-state drivers 1.8, we're going to charge out-of-state drivers 1.8, but you require out-of-state motorists to pull over and have a vehicle inspection, or perhaps even have other onerous requirements set up in order to capture that driver, you could be challenged, and there are some cases where states have lost on the grounds that you are discriminating and impairing the right to interstate travel. This has come up most, particularly the trucking industry is the perfect example. I'm going to highlight one case and then I'll keep moving. Recently in the New York Supreme Court, so it was a state Supreme Court, it wasn't the U.S. Supreme Court, there was a lawsuit filed, it was a class action, and because the truckers were required, both in-state and out-of-state, to pay $14, an annual registration fee of $14, plus $4 for a decal that has to go on your truck. And that is your registration basis for operating within the state of New York. The out-of-state truckers sued, arguing that that is an unfair or undue burden on interstate commerce. And their argument essentially was, not that $14 is a lot of money, but you are charging us. We don't travel in your state very much at all, yet you're charging us effectively more than you're charging your own truckers because you've applied a flat fee. And the flat fee hasn't been apportioned according to usage or value or anything that we can tell. So de facto, we think that you're impeding interstate commerce. The court upheld that. And so as we think about things like, well, what would a time permit look like for drivers coming in from out of state, we have to be careful about that and think through how would you structure your time permit so that you don't run afoul of potential rulings like that. I will point out, though, that the Supreme Court also said that, you know, you have the perfect system in place. It's the weight mile tax or the mileage tax that's reported to IFTA. Why don't you just charge people by the mile? So I'm sure that'll get brought up at some point. I'm going to just highlight this in the interest of time. These are the issue now is the second one, which is standards for distance measurement devices. And the reason that this matters is because odometers, passenger vehicle odometers, are for one purpose, and that's really to have a rough approximation of how old your car is or how old the engine is or the components are, how much wear it has. They were not intended or developed for revenue grade metering. And to the extent that this will be interesting in the pilot project for people that are comparing their GPS-enabled devices against their odometer, what is the difference and whether that difference matters to them, and then finally, which one do they feel is more accurate? Because right now, the plus or minus, what do you call it? The accuracy is probably greater for GPS than it is on your odometer. So that's going to be interesting. And until the federal government, they have regulated in some fashion odometer accuracy, but only for hire vehicles. So that's taxi cabs, anybody that charges by the mile. Okay, you have to be accurate within plus or minus 4%.
Jeff, I'm sure you've answered this before, but does the OBD2 device reflect the odometer reading, or is it a separate measurement?
It's a separate measurement, right, Matthew?
I mean, there's two types of OBD2 devices, those with the GPS and those without the GPS. Those with the GPS is a separate measurement. I mean, they sort of use the odometer reading as a correlating factor.
Okay.
Generally, the GPS is more accurate than the vehicle odometer.
And those without the GPS use the odometer?
Yeah, in a sense, basically.
Okay.
There are other federal laws that require, they're odometer laws, but they're aimed at anti-fraud. So, for instance, NHTSA, National Highway Traffic Safety Institute or Administration, they have a division that is investigating odometer fraud, but its powers only go as far as fraudulent, basically odometer rollback, so that people can resell vehicles for more than they should be able to. But they don't have any requirements for the accuracy of the odometers itself, so at least not in passenger vehicles. So the issue is, will you have observations through the pilot project about participants not believing the odometer or wanting greater accuracy since they aren't revenue grade meters? Just as a point of interest, I find it interesting anyway, gas pumps are plus or minus 6%. But people don't, either they're not aware, or at least there is a measurement and enforcement regimen in place so that you have, if the inspector happened to come through your favorite gas station recently, your chances of paying the right amount is probably better. But that seems to have precluded these mass action, either class action suits or individual complaints, because there's actually a standard that you have to follow, and there's an enforcement agency, and it's expected. So anyway, the reason that this is coming up under interjurisdictional issues is because the feds have not taken any action on this. That would be ideal. It's unclear whether or not the states can take action. The feds may claim that they have preempted state action on this because they've passed odometer laws for for-hire vehicles and that type of thing. But right now they haven't. So the question really is there something that one or more states can do, either through laws, lawmaking, at the state level, through regulations, if you have entities such as the California Air Resources Board or other rulemaking entities, or are there things that states can do through market mechanisms? For instance, if the state only were to recognize mileage measuring devices that have met certain testing and certification standards, only those are allowed in the pilot. There might be things that the state can do in the absence of federal action. Okay, the last one, which I'm only going to tell you that it's an issue and that there is work underway. We won't go into the details of it, and I don't have the details for you today. Really has to do with when one of those motorists crosses into California, and let's say they come from Oregon, they owe the Oregon road charge, and now they owe the California road charge. Who do they pay what to? And how is the amount that they owe determined? Do they have two accounts, one with the state of Oregon, one with the state of California? Do they have one account and somehow it's reconciled? Do they pay a third-party entity, and that third-party entity determines the taxable miles that are owed to jurisdictions, like a clearinghouse, and report it back? Those are issues that hang up not only at the implementation end, but actually on the finance end. I think was alluded to earlier, is that to the extent that states have bonded their revenues and they have procedures in place to ensure that they don't have revenue leakage, you also have requirements for the Treasury as to who can accept money and who can hold it. State of Oregon, for example, this would probably be an issue with them, is because they don't have a state sales tax, there's no recognition that a private party may be a tax collector. So they haven't, I mean, they're working it out. In fact, they have worked it out, I think, for their road use charge program. But they didn't have a mechanism in place for anybody but the state treasury to collect tax money. So there are issues like that that we're flagging, and it's not only through the California Road Charge Project, but it's also, I think, at the Western Road Usage Charge Consortium, and other states are also exploring this topic, having to work out some of the regulations and laws about who drivers pay to make it seamless as possible, and also to keep the state treasuries happy. Okay, so the main takeaways for the California Road Charge Program, one is that as we move forward and you think about designs that for collection of a road charge, you want to be cognizant not only of its legal structure, in other words, the prices and whatever your fines or remedies are, but also how it's applied, so that you don't place on either commerce or on individual drivers undue burden on them and somehow draw a lawsuit that is going to be adverse. The revenue grade mileage measurement accuracy could be an issue, and there are things that California can be doing now, either on its own through existing powers or working with others. And I think, as I just highlighted, the fee collection and revenue distribution has to be thought through, and individual states, ideally working with individual states, trying to come up with a system that's acceptable to everyone. And you have a partner to the north that you're going to be testing through the pilot, and hopefully we can make some advancements there. I apologize for the long presentation.
No, it's good.
And that concludes.
Any other questions?
Just one thing.
Lisa?
So when you talk about the toll roads, so the toll roads in Orange County are privately funded, but they are maintained by Caltrans, so that's not a problem. But we're contemplating an I-405 tolling project, which is a $2 billion project. Part of the toll that's paid by the user goes towards maintenance. So if you're paying VMT on top of that, then it's almost like a double taxation. So we're going to have to figure out how to reconcile that.
That's interesting. That's not the situation now with tolls don't go to fund the maintenance?
No, but it's a project where we'll have toll lanes from the I-605 through the I-405 and then connecting into the 73 toll road. And part of the toll that's paid, part of the agreement with Caltrans is part of the toll that is paid by the user of the toll lane will actually go towards maintenance. And so I don't know what that percentage is, but when you think about part of the toll goes toward maintenance, and then if you've got to pay the VMT on top of that, then it's sort of a double taxation, really not fair to the user. So that's kind of an unusual situation, but that is something coming up. That's a project that's approved and is moving forward.
But, we'll add that to our list of questions or issues, and I would like to follow up on that. There are some other states that have similar arrangements. They haven't stumbled on it yet, but they also don't have a road charge.
Yeah, just something to think about for the future, because it is coming up and it's an equity issue. And then on the toll roads, we're going to run into the same situation here, depending on the data collection and invoicing methodology. But some of the users that may be getting a bill in the mail and they don't pay it, what do we do? So on the toll roads, we basically put a vehicle registration hold at the DMV. So that's something to think about. It's a very easy way to make sure that fee gets paid.
Yes, if they're California drivers.
Yes.
Yes. Thank you.
Mitch, do you want to add
Oh,
something?
and just one thing I would point out, that's an interesting question about the double tax, but right now, under the excise tax situation, that situation exists already. And so this may be a situation similar to when we talked about accommodations, that there are, to different sectors, there's going to be benefits, positives and negatives to our existing system and any future system. And so this may be a group that we want to include in looking at that.
Okay, any other items to throw onto the parking lot for our next meeting? Any issues, Mitch or Travis, you want to review with us that will be
Well,
going on?
so I have a whole list of issues that I have to follow up on. I have 9 things.
Let's hear it.
Keep the the TAC seem to want to keep the volunteer website up to recruit in areas where we're below the target. And similarly, to look at enrolling more than 5,000 to account for attrition before it happens rather than reacting after. Surveying those who volunteered but didn't enroll. Look at zip codes where those who didn't disclose income or ethnicity information are located to see if we can interpret something from that. There was a request to share the sample invoices. There were 2 issues related to participants. One is, can we develop perhaps a media contact list or some way that we can get volunteers or enrollees who the media could speak with? And related to that, include in the newsletter information about the TAC meetings and invite enrollees to come and provide some feedback. Can we share some of the, yes we can and we will share the survey information and questions, and also the objectives traceability matrix. And then lastly, there was a lot of discussion about the calculations on that beautiful picture of the state of California, and what is the denominator and how is that exactly calculated. So we'll answer that. I think that's everything.
Sorry.
Sure.
Yeah, one of my questions is whether we might find out too late that we have not been able to convert participants from certain demographics into enrollees. And when I say too late, I mean maybe late into the enrollment period or the question is it possible to keep track in near real time the conversion rate from volunteers to enrollees so that if there's certain demographics that are falling short, they can be targeted earlier rather than later?
Matthew?
I mean, I'm not the person who's following up with that, but I mean, that is I think that would be a substantial amount of work to keep up with the near real time. I think maybe when we reach a level like 4,000 or so, we can at that point jump in and do an analysis and see where we are. Doing that in sort of a daily near real time is actually.
Well, one of the things that we had been getting is weekly updates on where we sit in the volunteers compared to some of the key areas in the metrics, and perhaps we can transition that from, is that possible to go from enrollees, from volunteers to enrollees, so we can?
It will be, I just don't want, I don't know if I want to promise it on a weekly basis, but it's something that we will certainly look at, and certainly look at before, well, there's still quite a number of volunteers left to do, yeah.
And we're going to fix that terminology, which was a good suggestion. Is it enrollees, volunteers? Professor?
I had an issue. We have, from the beginning of our discussions, well over a year ago, sort of had difficulty dealing with people and vehicles as 2 units of reporting. And, we have 5,000 vehicles. That doesn't actually mean 5,000 enrollees because some people own multiple vehicles. Mm-hmm. And interestingly, since low-income people own fewer vehicles than high-income people, it affects our reporting on the basis of social and demographic characteristics. So I'd like to ask if the staff or the consultants could sort of develop a protocol for reporting. I would like to know, when attitudes are reported, how many people that represents and how many vehicles. And I'd like to know, when you tell me that there are this many thousand vehicles in the low-income category, I'd like to know how many individuals or households that represents as well. And I find myself getting confused, and I think others are as well. So maybe there's a way of breaking that down in a clearer format that would help us keep track of both vehicles and people.
It's a good idea.
Add that to the list.
All right. Looking around the table, I don't see anything else. Is there any non-agenda public comment or anybody in the audience that wants to address us? Or anything that we haven't already said ad nauseum? Seeing none, our next meeting.
I'm going to transition from a volunteer to enrollee when I get home tonight.
All right, well, but don't forget to have, now that I learned, I'm going to have my VIN number before I even click that link. Yeah, and the odometer reading. I would have not known because I didn't read the fine print, but that's normal. I don't think anybody reads those buttons when they click accept on most of the apps that we have on our phones either. So our next meeting, and I don't have it in front of me, was what, September 24th?
16th.
16.
September 16, that's right, September 16 of 2016 in San Diego. And we'll look forward to seeing you all there. Nothing else before us. We stand adjourned. Thank you.
Okay.